Good evening, everyone. My name is Jennifer McHugh, and I'm the manager of adult learning at the Michener Art Museum. I would like to welcome you to our program, The Pennsylvania Impressionists, A Regional Legacy. This talk will explore the lives, techniques, and contributions of key artists that were part of the Pennsylvania Impressionist group, such as Edward Redfield, Daniel Garber, and Fern Coppedge. Assistant curator Abby Lua will guide you through their work. We hope you will develop a deeper appreciation for the unique style and cultural significance of this influential group, whose work helped shape American Impressionism. We will have time following the program for Q&A, so we ask that you please enter your questions into the Q&A section. And now, without further ado, I'll pass it over to Abby.
Thank you, Jen, for that introduction. And give me one moment as I share my screen. Okay, let's do this. Okay. Hi, everyone. As Jen introduced, my name is Abby Lua, and I'm the assistant curator at the Michener Art Museum in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. And I will be presenting just an overview of Pennsylvania Impressionism. If you are familiar with our museum, it is one of the strengths of our collection, as it is and as it was and still is culturally significant to the Delaware Valley, River Valley region where we are located. And so just to give everyone a roadmap of where we're heading tonight in this presentation, I'll just kick us off with really giving us an overview of the history of Pennsylvania Impressionism, which began not in Pennsylvania, but in France. And so we'll start there, and then we'll go into how it had grown into the United States and the art scene there. And then after that, we'll go into the beginnings of Pennsylvania Impressionism, really looking at the two artists who really founded the New Hope Art Colony. And then lastly, the third section will be just an overview of the artists that Jen talked about in the introduction, as well as a few others that I've selected for the presentation. So without further ado, we'll begin with French Impressionism. And so Pennsylvania Impressionism really has its roots in the Impressionist movement of France in the 19th century. And so here we have pictured Impression Sunrise by Claude Monet. The term Impressionism comes from the aesthetic of the painting, which is a very impressionistic aesthetic. And so when you're painting an impressionist painting, you're really using loose brushstrokes that are very stroke-like, which you can really see in Monet's painting here. And another way that can help us to really understand this impressionistic quality is by comparing it to what preceded, or to comparing it to the art movement that preceded Impressionism, which is really the traditional and academic painting at that time. And so we have pictured here Liberty Leading the People by Eugene Delacroix. So as you can tell, paintings like these really were marked by realism. You can get sort of like this photo-like quality where there is a greater emphasis on likeness, and really painting what, is what you can see with the naked eye. And not only is traditional academic painting marked by this realism, but the subject matter is also very different from Impressionism. Subject matter within this traditional academic painting often drew from history, literature, or religious narratives. In this particular case, Delacroix was painting an allegory of the 1830 July Revolution in France. So, these subject matters really are quite hefty. And Impressionists were different. So in addition to the Impressionist strokes that broke away from realism, Impressionist artists like Camille Pissarro, who is pictured here, and you can find this painting at the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia. These artists steered away from historical subject matter. They paid more attention to depictions of contemporary life and local scenes. And they had a greater interest in light and shadow. And so you can see, as in the case of this painting, and even in Claude Monet's painting of a sunset, you have brighter color palettes. It's not as moody as Delacroix's painting, or not as dramatic. And so really there is that emphasis on the play of light and shadow in these works. And so in the light of this transition, even though to us today, as a 21st century viewer, we would see these paintings as old guard, or maybe, it's definitely not contemporary art. But during its time in France, Impressionism was really seen as avant-garde and radical. Uh, it was so much so that it was famously rejected by the Académie des Beaux-Arts and the Salon, which is the Academy's annual juried exhibition. And if you are an artist in Paris, you really want to be featured in the Salon. So to be rejected by the Salon was a big deal. Um, and so one critic named Lois Leroy infamously published a poor review in which he critiqued Monet's painting here, um, where he professed that, quote, wallpaper in its embryonic state is more finished than seascape, end quote. So you can tell he did not think highly of Monet's art as well as the art of other Impressionists. But at the same time, you can get a sense from that quote that he was really pointing at the unfinished, right? The quote unquote unfinished quality that characterized the genre of painting. Really, in that artists of the Impressionist movement sought to capture more the essence of the subjects that they painted. And so with that being said, we move into how French Impressionism traveled onto or into the United States. And so beyond France, the art movement traveled to the United States at the turn of the 20th century. It was introduced in a major New York exhibition in 1886 through the work of Parisian art dealer Paul Durand Ruel. And so while our focus for this presentation is on Pennsylvania Impressionism, and so this is a work in our collection by Charles Rosen, which we will revisit later in the presentation, I really want to emphasize that Impressionism really took root throughout the US. And I think it's important for us to really understand Impressionism as this United States art movement. And so further up north in Connecticut, you have the Lime Art Colony that gathered at the home of Florence Griswold. And if you're familiar with the Florence Griswold Museum in Connecticut, that building was originally that home in which the art colony gathered. And so artists like Willard Metcalf, who painted this painting here, and Childe Hassam were impressionists who gathered there and painted. And then you also have expressions of Impressionism as far west as California. And so you have, so we have this painting here by George Gardner Simons called Heisler Cove. And Heisler Cove is in Laguna Beach. And so again, we're emphasizing local scenes, which is what the French Impressionists painted as well, except this local scene is in California and not France. And so even though this art movement was now taking root in the United States, it's important to note that the significance of the movement really landed differently in the United States. In 1916, art critic Christian Brinton explained, quote, "It must not be assumed that American Impressionism and French Impressionism are identical. The American painter accepted the spirit, not the letter of the new doctrine," end quote. So rather than radical, as it was seen in France, Impressionism in the United States was perceived as virile, rugged, and closely tied to the national landscape. And so for Pennsylvania Impressionists like Garber, for instance, so going back to our PA Impressionists, quarries were frequent subjects of paintings, which you can see here over at Byram. Garber himself praised the rugged landscape of quarries along the Delaware River as giving, quote, "you things like the Grand Canyon, but on a scale commensurate with the canvas, end quote. So he saw these rock formations as local Grand Canyons, so to speak. These paintings also held sentimental and nostalgic value, and I felt like this painting by Edward Redfield really conveyed that sentiment through. And so you can imagine that during a time of upheaval, insecurity, and great change during the 20th century, especially with the world wars, industrialization, urbanization, The emotional affect of this nostalgia really brought a lot of comfort and a sense of a cohesive American identity to painters and viewers at the time. So again, not that avant-garde or radical um, thinking that Impressionism was really associated with in France. So now that we've established Impressionism and the roots of Impressionism, it's appropriate for us to now really think about the beginnings of Pennsylvania Impressionism. And so while many artists have lived in the Bucks County region for centuries, it was William Lathrop, who is on the right, and Edward Redfield, who is on, no, Lathrop is on the left and Edward Redfield is on the right. It was really these two who established the New Hope art colony, later to be called the Pennsylvania Impressionists. So Lathrop was the first to arrive in 1898. He settled in New Hope, Pennsylvania with his wife, Annie. They moved into a building called Phillips Mill in 1899, which would later become the center for the colony. And so on the right is the building at the time that they moved in or near around that time. And then on the left is still the original building today. And the Phillips Mill Community Association, which is its nonprofit organization name, it still offers robust programming for the arts in the region. As the center of life for the colony, the Lathrops hosted a very popular Sunday afternoon tea session for local artists, and they often held exhibitions where these Pennsylvania Impressionists could display their work. And I know that I mentioned earlier before that Impressionists were known for their light and bright and sunny color palette, but there is an exception. The exception is an idea or a part of the movement called tonalism. And tonalism refers to the ways in which Impressionist artists use a more muted color palette. It's not too bright, very simple colors. It's as if you're looking through a fog. It creates a very moody and atmospheric quality. And so tonalism is really what describes Lathrop's style. And so you can see that here through this untitled painting by Lathrop. And then you can also get a sense of it here. So in both paintings, right there, the foreground is dark. He's using dark greens. And then above is a grayish sky with, just like specks of blue peeking through the clouds. So again, a very muted color palette. And then after Lathrop, Edward Redfield arrived second, also in 1898. And he settled in Centerbridge and not New Hope just yet. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Centerbridge, Redfield famously painted this work of the burning of the bridge that connects Centerbridge to Stockton, New Jersey, over the Delaware River. And so this painting is currently on display at the Michener Art Museum if you have a chance to visit. But compared to Lathrop, Redfield adopted a more expressionistic brushstroke and color palette. And so when you see this painting in person, you can really see how the way that he painted the flames really comes off the canvas because of the thickness of his brushstrokes. And really that runs throughout his painting. So another example that we can look at that's also currently on display is this painting called Trout Brook. And so even though he's painting a winter scene, Redfield's technique really gives the sense that the cold season is anything but barren. So if you notice the brush that surrounds the brook, it really pops with bright colors against that white snow. The brushstrokes that he uses to paint the brook really give a sense that the brook is babbling with life. And if you see the painting in person, you can really see the thick impasto or the thick brushstrokes that he really lays on to paint this brook. And so really it feels as if, water is coming out from the canvas. And at that time, Redfield was the most award-winning artist. Except for the painter John Singer Sargent, Redfield received more lifetime awards than any artist in the United States. And so even at the 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco, a building from that fair is pictured here. He had an entire gallery to himself for his art. And really, when you think about these world fairs that have multiple buildings and each building has multiple galleries, for any artist to just have a gallery for himself is really quite an amazing statement of that artist's skill and artistry. And so from and after these two artists, the art colony grew. And so here displayed is a map of the different homes of the Pennsylvania Impressionists. And the list is definitely not exhaustive, as you can see in the key there. And so there are many reasons why artists really were drawn to this region. One was that the location of New Hope was very appealing. New Hope slash all the other Delaware River towns. Uh, New Hope was in between New York and Philadelphia, so they were, with it being tucked in between these two metropolitan centers, artists could have easy access to the art scene of these cities. But it was also far away enough. So in the mid 1890s, there was an economic depression that really led to rising unemployment in metropolitan areas. And so it was advisable to move out of the city at that time. The New Hope area also really boasted a beautiful and bucolic landscape that really is still beautiful to this day, if you come and visit. And it also had very affordable real estate, which maybe is not what the reality is today. But at the time, it was affordable. And so as a result, really moving to New Hope was both the most aesthetic and practical choice for living and art for these artists. And so, yes, these artists, they grew up in and around Phillips Mill, which I have circled here in red. And yeah, they settled on the land along this Delaware River where they could take advantage of its convenient location and ample landscape subject matter. And so you can see examples here from Redfield's paintings. And then we'll just end with an overview of artists. Again, this is not exhaustive by any means, but I really wanted to choose artists that we had on display here at the Michener. So if you come and visit, you can really reference this presentation and look at the paintings at the same time. And so the first artist that I'll touch upon is one that Jen mentioned in her introduction, but this is Daniel Garber, and he's painting here at his home in Catalosa. So Daniel Garber was a significant artist in the New Hope Art Colony. He was born into a farming family in Indiana, but he moved east as a teenager to pursue his dream of being an artist. And then after studying at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts and in Europe, Garber settled down in his home called Catalosa, which is pictured here, as I mentioned, which is in Lumberville in 1907. And as you can imagine, just like the larger Delaware River Valley region, his home was plenty inspiration for him. And so this painting called Up the Catalosa is a view from the scenery that was around his home. For over 40 years, Garber was a leading instructor at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, which is the nation's first art school. He influenced younger generations of painters, and a number of students actually moved to the region after visiting his home in Catalosa and really falling in love with the landscape. And so just two works that I'll highlight to exemplify Daniel Garber's art. First is this painting by Tanis. So this is currently on view, and it really is such a masterful example of the way that he handles light in his painting. So if you really take a look, my favorite example is if you look at her garment. So this is a painting of Garber's daughter Tanis, and she's wearing this really gossamer and diaphanous garment, and right, he really, the way that he brings out the white in her garments makes you think, really gives the illusion that light is passing through this really sheer fabric. And the way that the light creates a crown over her head, right, that halo around her golden hair. And really the way that bright background just illuminates light onto Tanis and glows, helps her to glow forward. It really is quite a feat for Garber, and we're so thrilled to have it at our museum currently. It is owned by the Philadelphia Museum of Art, but the Lenfest gift to the Pennsylvania Museum of Art stipulated that it must be displayed at the Michener for 3 months every 3 years. And so she arrived to our museum in late November, and we have her until early February. So, um, yeah, come check her out before she leaves in mid-February. Next, we have a wooded watershed, which is a mural that has a very prominent place in our Putman Smith Gallery, which is also where Tanis is. Uh, Wooded Watershed was painted in 1926 for the U.S. Sesquicentennial in Philadelphia. And the sesquicentennial is the 150th anniversary of the US's founding. And for reference, we are in our 250th year currently, and I won't try to say the name for that, but right, we have these annual celebrations that where cultural institutions are finding ways to honor the nation's founding. And so here is just a newspaper clipping of Garber painting the mural. A wooded watershed depicts a picturesque view of the Delaware Water Gap, which was a popular tourist destination at the time. Um, and when it was finished, it was displayed at the Pennsylvania Building at the World's Fair. And the mural communicated the Commonwealth's natural beauty as an important and consumable resource. But the life that a wooded watershed led after it was completed, after it was displayed, is really interesting. And I won't go too in depth with the story, but it is a very interesting story, so I'll go through it quickly. But the mural was lost for 60 years after the mural was completed. And then, 60 years, after the 60 years, it was finally found installed at the Penn State Los Altos campus in their auditorium. And so we have that pictured here, and the pictures to come are from our archives. The mural was in very bad shape, as you can imagine, for being lost for 60 years. But our museum was able to acquire it and conserve it. And so you can see beginnings of that work here in the top photograph. They're taking down the mural and they're inspecting it below. And then here are just some images of the conservation work. And I think this is already at the museum and installed and just being worked on. And then finally, after much conservation work, it was finally installed, or it was installed and then unveiled at our museum. The next artist that I want to talk about is Charles Rosen, and this is a portrait of him by William Lathrop. And yeah, again, this is just a photograph of that portrait. So Charles Rosen moved from Western Pennsylvania to New York City, where he studied painting at the National Academy of Design. In 1903, Rosen and his wife moved to the New Hope area where they lived for the next 17 years. The artist enjoyed close relationships with Garber, Redfield, Lathrop, and another artist named John Follansbee. So again, really emphasizing that community of New Hope art colony artists. I brought up this work earlier, but this is a painting called Opalescent Morning. And you can really get a sense of that impressionistic brushstrokes. They're very loose. He really has his very iridescent color palette, and you can get a sense of the movement, the shimmering light, and the vivid color of a morning on the Delaware River. And then this is another example, which is currently on display right as you enter our Putman Smith Gallery, and it's called Water Birches. However, if you're at the museum and you walk a few more steps into our Commonwealth Gallery, which is where we have selection of works from our modernist collection, you'll notice this other work by Rosen, which is a lot more abstract. In 1918, Rosen went to Woodstock, New York to teach at the Art Students League in the Art Students League summer school. And then in 1920, he moved there permanently, where he made a dramatic shift in his artistic style and subject matter. So as you can see from under the bridge, Rosen pursued abstraction and bold colors and turned his attention from bucolic landscapes to gritty industrial scenes. And again, right, this painting is literally called Under the Bridge, and you see dilapidated structures in the background and even a little bit in the foreground. And he's really abandoned that loose brushstrokes that characterize an impressionist painting. But I wanted to bring this transition up between Impressionism to abstraction because this is a far more common theme within our Pennsylvania Impressionist artists than not, rather than a linear development from Impressionism to Modernism, where one art movement ends and another begins. Many Impressionists dabbled with modernism at the same time, and many Impressionist painters exhibited, worked, and lived in the same community with these modernists, and really were working around the same time. And so Rosen is just a classic example of that. A priority of our museum in recent years has been to emphasize and increase the diversity of our collection and even our collection strengths, including the stories that we tell of our Pennsylvania Impressionists. So with that being said, I wanted to end this presentation with a few women artists and artists of color within the Impressionist movement in this region. And so pictured here is Fern Coppedge. Fern Coppedge studied under Daniel Garber at PAFA, and Garber introduced her to Bucks County during a visit to his home in 1917. She ended up moving to this area after being so moved by the beauty of the area, and she bought a home along the Delaware Canal in Lumberville, New Jersey. And so she painted the area here, which is also on display in our museum. And then eventually she moved to New Hope. And then here is another one of her paintings that is on display called Jersey Village. Coppedge, as well as a few other women artists in our collection, were part of a notable group of artists called the Philadelphia 10. These women established spaces for themselves to exhibit together during a time when white men largely dominated the field. And so we have a few more Philadelphia 10 artists represented in our collection and are displayed. And so one example is Emma Fordyce McRae, and representing her is her painting of a woman named Stalka, pictured here. And yes, so this woman, she's dressed in Eastern European garb, and she's posed in a very colorful and sumptuous setting. And then if you look close enough, either if you zoom in on your own, or when you visit our museum, you'll notice the chalk-like texture of her work. McRae was the kind of artist where she applied her paint sparingly, so that the canvas below can really come through, and really show its texture. And so you really get this, very chalky surface when you look at her paintings. We also have the work of Mary Elizabeth Price, who is pictured here. Mary Elizabeth Price was raised in Bucks County, and she also studied at PAFA. She was influenced by fellow New Hope Art Colony members Daniel Garber and Ray Sloan Braden, who is actually her brother-in-law. So Price was part of a family of artists. So in addition to herself, a painter, her brother Frederick Newland Price ran an art gallery in New York. Her brother Reuben Moore Price was a framer, and Price actually also made decorative arts, or like folding screens. And he was the one, so she would provide the painted panels, and her brother Reuben would create the frames for them. And then Reuben married Elizabeth Friedley, who became Elizabeth Friedley Price, and she was also an artist. And then lastly, her younger sister Alice married the painter Ray Sloan Braden, who was her brother-in-law, as I mentioned. So currently, we don't have Price's work on view. We just recently took down Flower Border 1 and Flower Border 2 for research for an upcoming exhibition of Price's work. But she was known for her floral still lifes, as you can see here, which she painted with oil paint and metal leaf. So she used gold metal leaf, aluminum metal leaf to really create these shimmering surfaces and backdrops for her flowers. If you're interested in learning more about Price, our chief curator Laura Igo and myself gave a lecture last year called A Peek of Price, where we discussed early research findings or as we prepare for the 2020 exhibition of her work, and you can find it in our YouTube channel. Last but not least, I wanted to highlight the artist Alan Freelon. Alan Randall Freelon was an important artist, printmaker, educator, and civil rights activist in this Philadelphia art community. he often painted impressionistic landscape paintings of the Philadelphia area, as well as Gloucester, Massachusetts. And that was really a big trend for the Impressionists. They would take trips up to Gloucester for the summer and paint the beautiful landscape there. And so here is an example of a scene from Gloucester, which is currently on view at our museum. And then here is another one that is currently in the collection of the Brandywine Museum of Art. So as you might be able to tell from these paintings, Freelon also adopted that bright color palette that Impressionists were known for, and he applied it in loose and very, blocky brushstrokes to create these really beautiful images. And for Freelon, he learned these techniques from the Barnes Foundation, where he was really inspired by artists like Cezanne. And I'll also add that Freelon actually received criticism from his art or for his art by philosopher and author Alan Locke, who is pictured here. And he wrote a book called The New Negro, which is pictured on the right, in 1925, in which he advocated for Black artists to explore African themes in their work. And however, in response, Freelon insisted that artists, regardless of their identity, had a right to choose their subject matter and means of expression. So he was really an advocate that Black artists can paint Impressionism, that it's not, as displayed even from the women artists, that Impressionism wasn't, just for white men, but really any artist of any gender or race can participate in this art movement. And on that note, that concludes my overview of Pennsylvania Impressionism. As Jen mentioned, I welcome any questions that you might have. And if you haven't done so already, please visit the Michener to see these works in person. So thank you.
Thank you, Abby. There is one question that I received. The person wanted to know, why did Charles Rosen's style pivot so aggressively? Was it a rejection in fashion and exploration of his artistic breadth? So,
That's a good question. So from what I remember, he modernism was rising at the time, and he saw it on view I believe it was at an exhibition that he saw. Um, and from what I was reading, once he saw it, he turned to, I believe, John Follansbee, who he was sharing a car ride with, and he really understood that he really felt like Impressionism was a thing of the past, and that the way to go forward was modernism. And so, in essence, that's from what I understand how he took on to the style. And really, from that point on, he really embraced modernist painting and really continued in that style.
thank you. I know that there were several examples in our collection. Um, oh, okay, we have another question. Karen said, wonderful presentation. Were these artists able to support themselves solely by selling their art to the public? Who did they sell to, and did they have patrons?
Mm, they, that's a great question. Were these able? I think a lot of these artists they had other jobs. So as I talked about earlier, Daniel Garber was also an educator. Mary Elizabeth Price was also an educator. So there were a lot of these artists, which is really the case today as well, also had these other streams of income. Um, an interesting story of patronage that I'm familiar with was for some of these impressionists, when they received different services like medical services, they would trade their paintings as a form of payment. And so we have this really wonderful painting called The Barbershop by Henry Snell. And he gave it to his doctor, Kenneth Libby, as a payment for medical services. And so that's an interesting form of patronage that I'm familiar with the Pennsylvania Impressionists. But then even beyond their lifetime, as you might have been able to tell from the credit lines of the paintings, the Lenfest, Jerry and Marguerite Lenfest were huge patrons of these painters beyond their lifetimes, and actually a large part of their collection they donated to us. And so Those are two patronage stories that I'll highlight.
Thank you. Okay, we have a couple. Did Daniel Garber teach any other well-known PA impressionists?
Hmm. He, let's see. So he taught Fern Coppedge. He also, gosh, he, yeah. Jen, are you familiar with? I feel like he had a hand in every artist's life, I feel like, whether in
I,
community or teaching
I
at
think
home.
so. It's interesting because he taught at PAFA for so long, and I
Mhm.
know that our current exhibit with Peter Payone, everyone, every time you turn around, there's another person that says that they studied under them. So I'm sure that he had many, many, including his granddaughter, um,
Right.
uh, Dana Garber, who
Yeah.
actually had a wonderful conversation with Laura back in December, and again is all recorded.
Yeah.
Um, oh, okay. This is another interesting question from Eric. Do you have the most Garbers in your collection for the PA Impressionists?
Is that, I wonder, is that asking, do we have the most Garber paintings of all, like compared to other museums or?
I don't know. I guess, well, here's another way to ask it. Maybe Eric will write again. Um, what artist, oh, for our collection, is Garber, I guess, the most prominently represented in our
Okay.
collection?
Yes, yes, yes. I believe so. I mean, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I would say we have the, of the Pennsylvania Impressionists, we have the most Garbers and Redfields and Lathrops. But actually, I feel like we have more Garbers than even Lathrop and Redfield. Yeah.
Don't we have a lot of his etchings?
We do. We do. We have a handful of etchings. Yeah, actually, a lot of these impressionists also have large collections of sketches and drawings. So even Henry Snell, who I didn't talk about too much, we have like a whole box of really small sketches, and two of which are on display currently. But yes, I would say Garber is the most represented for the impressionists.
Yeah, it's a shame whenever you can go through our database online if you go on our website. Um, and there's so many different pieces that we have from all these artists. Oh, Eric just said Daniel Garber is his cousin's great grandfather.
That it's a small world here in
Oh,
the Delaware River Valley region. Cousin's great grandfather.
it
Jeez.
really is. It really
Yeah.
is.
I think really since I started my job at the Michener, I really have come to see how closely knit a lot of these descendants are and how many of them remain in the region. So it's been really neat to reconnect and learn about that. So thank you for sharing that, Eric.
Yeah, it's interesting and all these people that ran into the artists or their spouse or they just have all these regular stories. Like I think
Mhm.
someone in our visitor services took piano lessons from maybe Charles Ward's wife. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just everyday stuff like that all the time.
exactly. Yeah.
We have, oh, a couple. Were there salons in the United States as well?
Oh, I not in the same, like not, I would say the French salon. The, the only thing that really carried over from the French salon is that it's that salon hang, where if you go into room and you just see all these paintings stacked on top of one another, that is the only thing that really carried over from the salon that I really am aware of. I think the salon in France is really situated within a very prominent Parisian school and was really the art show for France. But I feel like I feel like maybe something comparable would be like the Armory Show in New York, but I feel like there's just so many different smaller schools of art in the United States, even for that time, that to have such a centralized location for a judged art show is not, which is what the salon was. I don't think we really had anything like that. It's like all these other pockets of art shows, I believe.
Um, okay. Ruth Ann wants to know, is there still a remnant of the New Hope School active today?
There is one painter named Joseph Barrett who is the, he really is one of the remaining painters who was really part of that art colony or, was raised in that art colony. But other than that, I think really artists have shifted more towards contemporary art. Um, I mean, some do paint in that impressionistic landscape, but I think really the New Hope Art Colony was of that 20th century, mid 20th century time frame.
We have another question. What are some good volumes or monographs about these Pennsylvania Impressionists?
So an early volume is, that map that I showed earlier, that is from Tom Folk, and he wrote a book called Pennsylvania Impressionists. So that's a very early version. I feel like it was I think it was a Michener publication, but we also produced this large volume of Pennsylvania Impressionists and Impressionism. We might have copies in our bookstore, and if not, we do have it in inventory. But also, you can make an appointment in our library to research that. And then we also have volumes, individual catalogs of the different Pennsylvania Impressionists themselves. And so, for instance, Daniel Garber has a two-volume catalog raisonné, which refers to a book that details, to the best of its ability, every artwork that the artist has ever done. So Daniel Garber has that. John Follansbee has the catalog raisonné. There are catalogs for Edward Redfield and Lathrop. There's a catalog for Fern Coppedge and George Slaughter, who I didn't talk about. And so, yes, and all of these are available at our library.
Yes, the one that you referred to was Pennsylvania Impressionism, and that was by Brian Peterson,
Mm,
who was one of the first curators. It's very large, but it is very comprehensive.
yes.
Um, and like Abby said, there are a lot of great catalogs over the years we've done of different artists. Um, let's see, trying to see if there are any other questions. I do want to let you all know that we will be focusing on a lot of the Pennsylvania Impressionists this year. As Abby mentioned, we have Tanis on display, and it is the 100th anniversary of Wooded Watershed. So in February, on February 4th, we will be having Kathleen Foster, who is the Robert L. McNeil Jr. Senior Curator of American Art and Director of the Center for American Art at the Philadelphia Art Museum. She'll be here on Wednesday, February 4th at 1 p.m. She'll be here to talk about Tanis before Tanis goes back and has a new home in the museum. She'll discuss Daniel Garber and his role in the American Impressionist movement. And we also, as I said, A Wooded Watershed is 100 years old. And so we will be having a talk on Wednesday, March 11th. Sorry to think I didn't have it written down. With people that were involved in the recovery of that amazing mural. So it is going to be Dana Garber, who is Daniel Garber's granddaughter. We will have Bruce Katziff, the former director of the Michener, and Corinne Caldwell, who was the president of Mount Alto, where the mural had been housed in the back of an auditorium. So it's a really, really interesting story, and I hope you'll join us for that. It's at the museum on Wednesday, March 11th. So those are just a few that are coming up, and we will have more throughout the year. So
Yeah, more a year for Impressionism.
yes, yes. So I think, oh, and oh, Karen said another a wonderful resource is New Hope for American Art by James M. Altman. Yes, I have seen that one. That is a good one as well.
It's very thick, so lots of artists entries in that one.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Abby. Thank you, everyone that attended. I hope you all learned something new. I always learn something new every time I hear about our Impressionists. So take care, and I hope we'll see you at the museum soon. Bye bye.